for coming out for Malvern's Multiverse tonight. It's a monthly event we have here at our little bookstore where usually I chat with a poet or somebody involved in the book industry in the Austin area or who's passing through. Tonight I have the pleasure of talking to Joe Brundidge. Joe, good to see you.
Thank you.
Joe, I have so many things to ask you. Joe is an incredible person. He's been on the art scene and the poetry scene in Austin and around for a long, long time, and we'll go find out about that. And, I just want to start by reading one of your poems.
Please do.
The poem, and this is what I will use as an introduction. I've heard Joe read this poem. It's called Repeat. I will do my art. I will do the work. I will be the example. My existence doesn't need your permission. Who is Joe Brundidge? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Let me see a little bit about myself. I'm gonna try to do the succinct thing. I've been writing for the better part of about 42 years. I'm a short version. I am a person. I'm a poet. I'm a advocate of non-creepy hugs. Way I see it, I figure if you don't know as much as I do before we're done hanging around each other, then I've wasted your time. You know?
That's great. That's great. So, why did you start writing poetry?
I remember when I was a kid, my mother got registered. She used to listen to music all the time. And you knew in my house, you could watch Saturday morning cartoons all you want to, but you need to be prepared to listen to Bugs Bunny lip sync to Rick James or Betty Wright or ZZ Hill or whoever, and you better be prepared to do that after you were done cleaning up. And I remember one of the first love songs I ever heard was Let's Just Kiss and Say Goodbye by the Manhattans. I'm about 6 or 7 years old at the time, no idea what love is, but I knew as a kid, I knew then he was doing something with the words that was affecting me on some level. I was listening for the way, for the rhyme scheme. You know, it's a love song, so it's a standard A, B.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But still, you're listening to the way the words are flowing, and I knew that I liked that. I didn't know what poetry was, but I knew that I didn't know what lyrics were. But I knew that I liked that. And then one day, my English teacher in school, she read us a poem by Alfred Noyes called Daddy Fell into the Pond. And at the time, it was the most hilarious poem I had ever written. And again, I was just increasingly amazed that you could actually do that with words. My mother said I was reading encyclopedias, or staring at encyclopedias rather, by the age of 4.
Wow.
And then she, as soon as she saw that I had been taken by the poem, she bought me my first copy of Where the Sidewalk Ends.
Mm-hmm.
And I say it's my first copy because that book has been borrowed from me from time to time, and it somehow magically leaves my possession and I have to go buy a new copy. And even then, when I read Shell's work, for me, he took it to another level because his work, it ventures into, there's some rhyme, and, he mixes, he dances between rhyme and prose.
Right.
And I didn't even realize that he did more. You could call some of his work, poetry for children and what have you, but really, his work had such range to it that it was beyond age.
Right.
You could read some of his work now and apply it to your own life. You could apply it to all of us on a very human level, no matter what age you are. And I think that was what he was trying to leave with us. That ability to connect from person to person, no matter what your walk of life is. You remember the, the big O and the missing piece.
Yes,
Or
yes.
what have you, all those lessons laden in there, you know? And that's what I figure I wanted to try to do with my work, is just leave the lesson laden in there without hitting somebody over the head, but leave something that would imbue, if not empower.
I've noticed in hearing you read and reading your book, which we'll talk about a little bit more later, that you use a lot of humor. There is a lot of humor in your poetry, but there seems to be always another underlying purpose to that humor.
Yeah.
It's in the book. It's like you'll go to a humorous poem, and then all of a sudden you're hit with, like the first poem in the book, which just blew me away. It just, not the first poem, but the first long poem.
Yeah.
It's a poem that basically talks you into writing
Right.
poetry.
And it's funny, that one, how the book came about is a good friend of mine, Fabian Harper, who started Mid City Press, approached me. We had met at a barbecue, and he was like, well, I've heard good things about you, and I'm starting a small press. He was like, send me some of your work. And he was like, I love it. Let's get this book done. And at the time, I was going through, as we all do, and some of us still are, I was going through quite a bit at the time. There was anxiety issues, a lot of personal things, and I was like, yes. And then when I got home, I was like, what did I just agree to? And there's that fear. I think that we all have that fear that whenever we do something, we fantasize the end result to be something so much more bigger and grander that we think we'll never get that done. So I imagined this book that was just going to be so amazing and all revealing, and I'll never be able to do that. And suddenly I gave myself writer's block. And I sat there and I did a free write one day. And free writes, I feel like, are the best way. You ever go to a place somewhere with a bunch of your friends, you know what I'm saying? All y'all are hanging around, and you know you got that one friend. If something happens, if something crazy happens, that one friend's not gonna keep quiet, and you're probably gonna have some trouble leaving, because that friend's probably gonna get the situation riled up or what have you. And if something crazy happens, you're like, well, I hope so-and-so didn't see it, because we're gonna have trouble. And I feel like when you free write, your subconscious becomes that friend who wants to fire up and say everything you're being too polite to. And when you free write, when you really clear your head, what I do is I clear my head and I put the pen down in front of the empty notebook, set a timer for about 5-10 minutes, and then I just hit it and I just go. And whatever comes out, I don't care if it's tomatoes haven't spoken to toothpaste since the Jeffersons went off the air. It doesn't matter. I don't care if you don't punctuate anything. I don't care if you misspell the or whatever. Just keep going.
Yeah.
Keep going and keep going and keep going until that timer stops. And then when it's done, you breathe, you walk away, you come back, and if you did it right, then your subconscious snuck out. I'll give you a better example. I was doing a writing workshop in Mississippi at Ole Miss. And there was some kids there that I was having do it. There were some students there that were doing the free write. And one lady, she kept going back and forth to the restroom. Everybody else was writing, and they're laughing at the things that they're saying on the paper. I'm like, no, keep going. Only she's not laughing at all. She's just going back and forth to the restroom. And I was like, okay, some of you can share. You can share, you don't have to. Some people did, some people didn't. But when she stood up, she spoke about an experience she had had with a best friend who himself did something to her that your best friend should never do. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And she had never spoken about it. She had kept it bottled up for about a year and didn't know how to handle it. And she's reading it and she's shaking, and all of us, including myself, are crying. And she starts to tremble and she starts to like wobble back and forth. And before she starts to lean, everybody jumped up, even the people who didn't read. And they just swarmed around her and they just held her. And she just let it out. And that's why I figure the reason I mix the humor with the somber side or what have you, is because that's life itself.
Yeah, it's,
You know.
so many of your poems, they have the humor in them. They have some real sadness in them, some of them, with loss. But there's an energy of, shall we say, love and hate. Love and not hate, but anger and frustration.
Yeah.
There are many poems where I can tell you're expressing deep love and care for somebody in the poem. There are other where you're riding a bus. Tell us about riding a bus, Joe.
For those of you who haven't had the pleasure, and I won't just say Capital Metro, I'll just say any bus system in any major metropolitan area, it can be quite a not boring time. And there are moments to where, and it's interesting because on the bus, I figure it feels like the bus is a test of one's personal perspective metal, if that's the right phrasing for it, to where it's like you'll sit there like, I'll get frustrated at the person who comes on and pays for their $2.50 bus pass with dimes or nickels, you know, or pennies, not knowing that you're not supposed to pay with pennies. And I'm like, what is this person's problem? Never mind the fact that tomorrow I may be that person.
Yeah.
You know? So in dealing with that, there'll be some experiences where I'll be on, the bus will be coming from the drag, which I used to call the gauntlet. Because as soon as we hit this point on the bus, or as soon as we pass MLK, what'll happen is that you'll have college students who get on and they'll get their backpack off and they'll reach in and pull out a wallet and then pull out their pass. And I'm like, what is taking so long? And it calls your perspective. You're frustrated, but these are people who are working on their future right now. And when they wake up in the morning, their biggest priority isn't, man, I better have that pass out because Joe's trying to get where he's going. If I'm on the bus the same time he is, that's just not going to be cool. They're thinking about other things.
Right.
And there have been times where I've been so preoccupied.
Yeah.
I get on the bus and I'm like, oh, what's going on? I don't even know what color water is. Well, I don't even know what color blue is right now. I can't even roll a block. So when I used to rant about it when I first moved to Austin, and the thing about ranting, there's no point to it unless you're able to make somebody laugh.
Right.
There's no point to it at all. You can kick off little rocks you want to, but if you can't get at least a little kid across the street giggling at you for being a grown-up kicking a rock, then you're doing something wrong. It's just toxic if it's not making somebody else laugh. So I decided a friend of mine was like, you just need to every time you rant on the bus, it's not even like a rant, it's a poem.
Right.
And I just started, one day I looked, and I've actually been challenged to write a book about experiences on the book, which is one of my latter projects that I'm working on. And there have been a number of experiences on the bus to where I'm driven crazy in the moment and I'll type the rant out. And I'll be like, okay, I'm over it.
Okay.
And everybody will laugh at what just happened. And I'm like, okay, now I'm really over it because it's funny. It's not just a funny situation, but I see my own self getting bothered by it. And I'm like, that way you did something with that energy. You turned it around.
You said, one of the things that you bring up is that it sounds like you write kind of quickly, but most of the poems in the book look, fairly formal to me. They're in quatrains. You have a set of misnumbered haiku in there, and so it seems that form is very important to you. Is it something you're hearing, or was it with form? You don't just run on.
Some of the quatrains were due in part to Fabian's editing, to where he saw what I was doing with the word, because I have most of my background in poetry comes from spoken word. I mean, don't get me wrong, I read poetry up until high school, and then I found about spoken word, and then my style shifted and changed. Art is growth, you know. And I started looking, then later on, after the last time I slammed, like, you know, professionally, quote unquote, not professionally, but after I stopped doing it a lot, back in '07, I started looking into the different styles. And I started saying there are other places I can take my work. You know, art, like I said, art is growth. If I'm writing, if all I've done is written limericks my whole life, let me see what I can do with haiku. Let me see what I can do with this type of poetry, this type of poetry. Let me stretch my life over all these different forms, or stretch my perspective or what I see, and let me interpret through all these different ways. And there are some poems that you'll find in there that were like written, like you said, some of them on the fly. Some poems you work on rather quickly. Some poems, the longer ones, they tend to work on you.
Yeah.
Like Muted. That
Right.
Muted very much worked on me. I didn't even really want to put it in the book. I wanted to keep it to myself as a catharsis. But
It's a beautiful way to start the book.
yeah, and once I looked at it and I read it again, I realized this isn't just a message that belonged to me. Like one of my favorite play uncles, Tom the Row Poet.
Okay.
He who was for me I proclaim him the Johnny Appleseed of the Austin poetry scene. And he's told me before that as soon as you reach at least one person with a poem, it's no longer yours. You have a responsibility to read it whenever you can, because that night you read it for the millionth time, maybe that night it saves someone else. Somebody may have needed it. Yeah.
Let's, you know, we could talk forever, but there's one more question I want to ask before we get into the reading. And that's that there's some visual art in this. Could you tell us just a little bit about that?
Well, some of the art itself, Fabian himself is a painter.
Okay.
And he's an amazing visual artist, and he's got a great eye. And he remarked a lot about how my poetry invoked imagery to him, and it would conjure up images. He would work to find images that best suited some of the work you would read in there. Like there's a poem about there's a haiku I have about the moon.
Yes.
And he was like, I need something to go with this. Yeah. And he showed me an image, and I was like, that's beautiful. He was like, okay, well, that doesn't just go in there.
It's really, if you have a chance, please look at the book and buy the book, but please look at the book. The artwork is really stunning. It's like this black and white, almost shadow-like. It comes in and out of focus as to really being something, right, or just a fuzz. It's really wonderful.
I've always loved collections of poetry to where you mix in. There's something about mixed media that helps with the layers of the work. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I've seen poetry books. I've seen books of poetry written by people who also do their own photography.
Yeah. They'll
take the pictures and you'll see like the lines, whether it's a 3 or 4 line poem or even a long one, next to like a cityscape or next to a person in lament or what have you. You know, like even me, I've experimented. Like you look at the, I won't even say phenomena. You look at memes. Mm-hmm. People regard them as pop culture, and yeah, some of them aren't exactly the pinnacle of modern art. You won't exactly see dank memes in the Louvre, but it's still something. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
The words and the image work together to give you something, whether it was chuckle or a laugh or a provoked thought. Yeah. I mean, it's still provocative regardless.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you so much. Well, Joe, I think, you know, as I said, I could talk to you all night, but let's hear some of your stuff. You want to read for us a little bit?
I don't mind if I do.
10 minutes or so.
Not a problem.
15 minutes.
Not a problem.